Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our garden in Spokane, Washington. The hardiness zone ranges roughly 5B to 6A. Well, I don't know if you can see a difference, but our garden is doing so much better, and so I'm really excited to show you all of the triumphs. As a recap, just in case you aren't familiar with our garden, we have had the most challenging growing season ever. Crazy temperature extremes, a lot of cold temperatures, some burning hot temperatures, and I have had oddball problems, and I'm so glad to see that the majority of the garden is back on track. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. About a month ago, this bed of Supremo paste tomatoes was filled with spindly little plants about this tall. A couple of them had tried to even form some small tomatoes. I snipped those off. And then in the last few weeks, they have really been growing. Now this is a determinate tomato, so they're not going to be super tall, but they are absolutely laden with tomatoes. So I wanted to show you that. Here's a couple of clusters of tomatoes. You can see they're almost kind of egg-shaped. And I grew these last year for the first time. I was so impressed with them. And because they are determinates, the majority of the tomatoes will ripen at the same time, and that is ideal for canning projects. You can get a feel for the amount of tomatoes that are on these plants. It is phenomenal. You'll notice this last tomato is not petite, and that's because it's a Chef's Choice orange tomato. It's a slicing tomato that is a beautiful orange color, and they are so delicious. So I absolutely always have to grow at least one every summer. And you can see tomatoes on it, so that is very gratifying. In this bed right next door to the Supremo tomatoes is an indeterminate variety called Blue Beach, also a paste tomato. I'll show you some in just a moment. But these ones were also struggling with our crazy weather, and they have put on a lot of growth. Actually, I trimmed them back just a little bit because what I tend to do this time of year, so here we are almost to the middle of August, I will prune back some of the stalks, and that's so that the plants will focus their energy more on developing the existing fruits rather than blooming and producing puny little fruits that won't make it by the end of our growing season. So let me show you some of the tomatoes. Here are some of the tomatoes that are growing so far. And when I say paste tomato, what I mean is it's a type of tomato that's not so juicy like a slicer. And that way, when you're making things like tomato sauce, salsa, or ketchup, it thickens up very quickly. Here are a few more. Those ones are whoppers. And some here. And while we're on the subject of tomatoes, this bed is filled with grape tomatoes that Bill's been growing. He loves to use them for making fresh salsa. And they are absolutely covered with tomatoes. And you can see there's a lot of growth on here. What a difference. Here are a few of the grape tomatoes. In this bed, we've got one of our succession crops of corn. And you can see the plants are doing great. What was growing in this bed before was garlic. And once we harvested it, we thought, you know, there's still plenty of time to grow an extra crop of corn. Why not? So you can see the plants are doing great. It's tasseling. That's where the pollen comes from, drops down to the silks down below on the little developing ears. And each silk that is pollinated will represent a kernel within the cob of corn. It's really quite fascinating. But wow, they are doing great. Do you remember how pathetic this melon bed looked a couple of months ago? In it, I had originally planted 3 cantaloupes and 3 watermelons. Well, the watermelons wanted nothing to do with the cold snap that we had. So 2 of them died. One of them is just kind of eking out a living, and it does have a tiny little watermelon on the vine. I cannot imagine that will be ripe in time for the end of the season. But The cantaloupes are doing beautifully. I've got 6 full-size melons in here, and I am just so excited that things turned around. The variety is Tuscan Napoli from Renee's Garden Seeds, and I definitely recommend it because A, it's delicious, and B, it is super easy to grow. We just have had a weird season. So here you can see 1, here's 2, here's 3, there's 1 hanging down on the side. Oh, and there's another one over here, plus there's 1 over here and 1 hanging over the side there. This is going to be a great harvest. If you've been following me for a while, you know that we grow our pole beans on an arbor, and the arbor is made up of 4 trellises that span a pathway between 2 raised beds. We're growing Vortex, which has been a very reliable and prolific bean for us, but this year they have struggled mightily. I looked at last year's records, and we were picking beans like crazy the middle of July. They are only now starting to get at that point. So that tells you what a crazy growing season we've had. I am so excited to see them growing. I mean, they're just going nuts now, and even some of the vines are heading off this way. There's no support there, you guys. You got to go this way. Now, while we're on the subject of beans, do you think these are bush beans or pole beans? Take a look. These are actually bush beans, although you probably said pole beans because this is kind of crazy. So this bed was vacant a few weeks ago, and Bill decided to plant a succession crop of bush beans. And so you can imagine our surprise when this started happening. I've even had to run some twine around the perimeter of the bed to give them support because they were all trying to flop over. But yeah, it's labeled correctly. They just tend to be rather exuberant bush beans. And they have beautiful purple flowers, so I can't complain about that. I almost forgot, the variety is top crop, and I'll let you know how they produce for us. Let's take a little peek inside our hoop house to see how Bill's peppers are coming along. And if you're wondering about this, this is actually a frost blanket or heavy-duty floating row cover that Bill has put over the top of the hoop house because the sun was just so intense it was frying the poor plants in here. But come take a look. Peppers are one of Bill's favorite crops to grow every year, and he really excels at it. So you can see that there is a mix of hot peppers and sweet peppers, and the plants are looking so much better now that the weather seems to have stabilized. Now I wanted to show you one of Bill's most impressive peppers. Do you see this huge bell pepper here? That is Red Impact, which is an All-America Selections winner. It's our first year of growing it, and it is huge. Bill also excels at growing onions and garlic. Look at these whopper onions that he's grown. These are Ailsa Craig. And if you ever wonder how you know when an onion is finished growing, especially if you're brand new to growing onions, this is what happens. The stalks fall over. That is perfectly normal, so don't worry that something's wrong with your plants. So what we're going to do is wait until a majority of the plants have done that. We'll turn off the water to the bed and let them finish drying a bit, and then we'll move them into a shed where they can completely dry out before we put them into storage. And last but not least, I wanted to show you how our winter squash are doing on our squash arbor. I have to tell you that when I first planted these 2 beds, I put 4 seedlings in each bed, so a total of 8 plants. And they have been struggling with all of this crazy weather we've been experiencing. They didn't look like this 2 weeks ago, I have to tell you. And I'll give you a close-up so you can see the different kinds of squash we're growing. But suddenly, they kicked it into high gear, and Holy cow, they are doing great. So I'm really glad I didn't plant more seedlings in here, because that's what I felt like I should do, is get some more plants going, because I hadn't planted enough in the beds. No, I planted just the right amount, and I have to remember to just be comfortable with that. The two varieties of winter squash that I'm growing are Autumn Frost, which I've grown before, and that's this here. And I'm also growing Sweet Jade, which is a kabocha squash. That's a first timer for me this year. But you can see they're doing really nicely. Let me show you some more. There's a kabocha squash. Here's another Autumn Frost. And here's two more. They apparently didn't get the memo to start climbing up that arbor. I also wanted to give you a very quick update on how my green stock planters are doing. They are coming along very nicely. In the top tier of each planter, I'm growing smaller types of zinnias. My purpose was to attract as many pollinators and beneficial insects as possible. Boy, do I see the bees on them. These are the pretty and sweet peppers. They are pretty. The orange hat tomatoes have been producing tons of these little gems. Here are some Pizza My Heart peppers. Here are some of the Fantastico grape tomatoes, and boy, have we been picking a lot of them. I'm growing two different varieties of cucumbers, Space Master 80 and Mini Me. And there are so many epic hybrid eggplants. Some of them are just about ready to harvest. There's more over here. And these are a little hard to see, but these are jalapeno peppers. Really, all in all, the green stalks have been doing better than the garden, which has been very gratifying. Well, that's everything for now. I hope you found this video much more uplifting, because it's so nice to share the good stuff that's happening in the garden. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.